Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at Gondor's rise to power in the Third Age, and their victories that would see them as the dominant power in Middle-earth for over 1,000 years. With Gondor reigning supreme, the Westerlands of Middle-earth would experience a peace not seen since the rise of Sauron. With the untimely death of Isildur in the Gladden Fields, Gondor found itself in an interesting position. If Elendil's traditions were to be followed, then Valandil, Isildur's youngest son and a boy of 13, would become the High King of Arnor and Gondor. But who was Valandil to the men of Gondor, a boy who had never left Rivendell, who certainly did not have the experience to lead both Gondor and Arnor through the years to come? So Gondor became fully independent, led by Meneldil, the eldest son of Anarion, a man with a wealth of experience and knowledge, and if hearsay is to be believed, he was the very last man to be born on Númenor. Now, unlike Arnor, who had suffered greatly in the War of the Last Alliance, Gondor had emerged in a position of power. Comparatively, their losses had not been as high, so the men of Gondor went to work building fortifications that they could use to keep an eye on the dreaded, but now empty land of Mordor. These fortifications included Narcost and Carcost, the Tower of Teeth, that sat on either side of the Black Gate, as well as Durthang and the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Gondorian garrisons were also kept at Tharbad and Angranost, later known as Isengard, and fortifications were built along the undeeps of the River Anduin. With their eastern border secure, Gondor also went to work slowly assimilating the men that lived in the mountain vales and on the shores of central and western Gondor. Meneldil's reign ended up being peaceful and uneventful, and this ended up being the same for several of his successors. Kemendur followed Meneldil, following Kemendur was Eärendil, and following Eärendil was Anardil. Fun fact, due to the long lives of the Dunedain, all four of these kings were alive at the same time, with Anardil being 22 upon Meneldil's passing at the age of 281. Another fun fact, or maybe not so fun fact, is that Meneldil was almost certainly the last living Númenorian, and upon his death, no person remained that was born on Númenor. It was in the reign of Osterher, the son of Anardil, when Gondor would once again come under threat. Osterher's reign was mostly peaceful, and he oversaw great construction works in Minas Anor that would see the city become the summer residence of future kings of Gondor. However, in 490 of the Third Age, Gondor would come under assault by the Easterlings from Rhûn. Osterher was far too old to lead a campaign against them, and sure enough, he died 2 years later at the age of 270. Gondor's defense was instead organized by his son, Tarastar, and although we know nothing of the specifics of the war, we do know that Tarastar defeated the Easterlings in 500 of the Third Age. As a result, Tarastar would change his name to Roman Dakil, meaning East Victor in Quenya. Despite his victory, we also know that it wasn't a complete victory over the Easterlings, and in 541 of the Third Age, the Easterlings invaded a second time, and Roman Dakil was slain in battle, the first Gondorian king to be killed in battle during the Third Age. His son, Turambar, avenged his father and defeated the Easterlings, driving them beyond the Sea of Rhûn and greatly expanding Gondor's territory eastward. So great was this victory that the Easterlings would not trouble Gondor for almost 700 years. Gondor would have peace for several more centuries following this victory. The remainder of Turambar's long reign would be uneventful, as were the reigns of his son and grandson, Atanatar and Siriondil. After Siriondil's death in 830 of the Third Age, Gondor would experience a change of policy under Siriondil's ambitious son, Taranon, the first of Gondor's ship kings. Whilst heir, Taranon had become captain of the hosts, and had won territory for Gondor both south and west of the mouth of the Anduin. Upon becoming king, he added the name Falaster, which means Lord of the Coasts in Quenya. Taranon was also famous for his queen, a woman of Black Númenorian origin named Beruthiel. And although we can't be exactly certain of the reason behind this marriage, considering the animosity between Taranon and Beruthiel, it seems the marriage may have been for political reasons, perhaps to help mend the relationship between the kings of Gondor and the Black Númenorian lords to the south. Regardless of the reason this marriage failed, Beruthiel was exiled to the south and Taranon became the first gay king of Gondor. Okay, that last part was a joke, but Taranon did end up dying childless, the first king of Gondor to do so. The crown ended up passing to Eärnil, son of Tar-Kirian, who was the younger brother of Taranon. If Taranon did attempt diplomacy with the Black Númenorians, then it seems it must have fallen apart by the time Eärnil took the crown. He massively expanded Gondor's fleet and rebuilt Gondor's havens at Pelargir. He then used this massive fleet to attack Umbar, which he did in 933 of the Third Age, laying siege by both land and sea. The fortress fell that same year, and the Black Númenorian lords were driven into Harad. Umbar, once a haven for the King's men and later the Black Númenóreans, was now finally under control of the descendants of the Faithful. Unfortunately for Eärnil, his victory ended up being short-lived. In 936 of the Third Age, merely 3 years after he captured Umbar, he was at sea when a storm struck Gondor's fleet, and many ships and men were sent to the bottom, Eärnil included. Eärnil's premature death, his son Ciriandil came to the throne, and his reign was not an easy one. It was spent holding on to Gondor's new possessions in the south, and the Black Númenóreans were not sitting idly by. In 1015, 80 years after they had first been driven away, the Black Númenóreans returned, leading armies of Haradrim. Umbar was besieged and Ciriandil was slain, apparently being killed during the fighting in Haradwaith, so perhaps not in Umbar itself. The siege of Umbar lasted many years, but due to the uncontested naval power of Gondor, the city could be resupplied and reinforced, and therefore could not be taken. During this time, Ciriahur, the son of Ciriandil, gathered Gondor's strength, planning a campaign that would crush the Black Númenóreans and the Haradrim once and for all. This came in 1050. Gondor's armies crossed the River Harnan and utterly crushed the Haradrim and the Black Númenóreans. The kings of Harad acknowledged Gondor's overlordship, and the power of the Black Númenóreans of Umbar was utterly broken. Ciriahur, in celebration of his victory, changed his name to Hiarmendakil, meaning South Victor in Quenya. And that is a mouthful to say. Under Hiarmendakil, Gondor reached its greatest extent and the height of its power. To the River Celebrant and Greenwood in the north, to the Sea of Rhûn in the east, to Tharbad in the west, and to Umbar and the River Harnan in the south, Gondor reigned supreme. Haradrim, Easterlings, Northmen, and all other manners of men acknowledged Gondor's power, power which had not been seen since the height of Númenor. However, it should also be mentioned that not all was well in Middle-earth. During Hiarmendakil's reign, a darkness returned from the east. Its shadow fell first on Greenwood, and that forest soon became known as Mirkwood. But soon enough this darkness would start to appear in other places too. Perhaps if all Gondorian kings were like Hiarmendakil, this shadow could have been destroyed before it truly materialized. But that was not the case. Hiarmendakil died in 1149, aged 250, the fourth and final Ship King. His son was Atanatar II, also known as Atanatar Alcarin or Atanatar the Glorious. But Atanatar's glory came from that which he inherited, not from what he created. So it came to be that Gondor started to suffer what all great empires suffer: decadence. Atanatar II was a lazy man desiring luxury over ruling, the wrong man for the job. That's not to say that Atanatar II was responsible for Gondor's decline, but during his reign the first cracks began to form in this mighty nation, most notably in that the Watch on Mordor began to slowly dwindle. Unfortunately for Gondor, Atanatar's sons, Narmakil and Kalmakil, were much like their father. Atanatar died in 1226, and the throne was inherited by Narmakil, who was apparently so lazy that he couldn't be bothered to actually have children. Or maybe he was infertile, who knows. But luckily for Gondor, Kalmakil did have a child, a man named Minalcar. And Minalcar was more like Hiarmendakil than his father and grandfather. So it came to be that in 1240 of the Third Age, Narmakil declared Minalcar as regent of Gondor, and he would rule in all but name. He would go on to become one of Gondor's greatest rulers, but he would also make a decision, an innocent and perhaps even a good decision at the time, but still a decision that would set in motion events that would end up dealing Gondor a grievous blow. But that's a story for the next episode. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. The episodes throughout the Third Age are the ones that I've been really looking forward to, as they are rarely covered by, well, anyone at all. Next War in Middle-earth episode will take us north to Arnor, but before that, a video on Gondor's power at its height. Cheers, farewell, and remember, please don't ever name your kid Hiarmendakil.